You win some, you lose some. All right, here we go. It is the NFL Deeper Dive presented by FantasyDraft.com. I'm Dave Lockren. With me, Ben Rasa and Alex Baker, Awesemo himself. Fellas, week 7 already. We're almost halfway through the NFL season. Ben, it's wild how quickly it's moving, man.
It really is. It was feels like we just got started, and honestly, halfway home. Teams are, we're going to be almost done with buys soon, and we'll be back to a full 13-game slate. Pretty crazy.
Alex, how we feeling, man?
Man, that's not a great reminder because I know, like, at the start of the season, we all want to win that $1 million, and I don't think any of the three of us have gotten it done yet. So we only have half as many chances now. I don't like that.
Yeah, but you do have that, and I won't be in it, but I'm assuming you will have max entries in the $3,000 entry Millie Maker. That's, literally the best opportunity you could ever have to win $1 million.
I don't really recommend entering that contest. It's for the biggest gens out here like me, but it is a good chance to win $1 million. That's the one thing it has going for it.
Yeah, there's what?
It's like 1,000 people. It's really not that bad.
Yeah, it's 11. It's a 1,111 entries, $1 million to first place. So, needless to say, you could certainly have worse odds. And there's 33 max entries. Ben, Alex maxed it out, so he's got what do you have? Like a solid 3% chance of winning $1 million today.
Yeah, having 33 bullets in that. I'll probably have one, so we're up to 34 bullets for the show. So now we really got it locked in, but we'll see. That they changed the milli pricing. Obviously, that they moved the big one to $10, so there's a lot of entries.
Only 411,000.
Yeah. So to take that down is going to take quite a combination today.
That's the true definition of outrageous right there. Almost 500,000. I guess anything's possible, right? And that's what we're here to talk about. We've got ourselves 11 games on the slate. Of course, one tonight between the Eagles and the Cowboys. We will have a showdown live before lock leading up to that right beforehand. And then tomorrow we'll have a live before lock for Monday night for that wonderful Patriots-Jets game. We have the Patriots and Dolphins next Monday. Why? I don't know.
Yeah, it's bad.
I can't wait to see the Patriots defense ownership at captain on that game.
Oh, I know. It's like captain spot defenses have actually done really well recently. It's insane. The Patriots are allowing 8 points per game this year.
We're playing Miami and the Jets. We'll do that.
Yep. I think they got the Skins already too. Or they get them down the road. I can't remember, but no, they got them already.
Yeah, they had them.
But anyway, let's jump right into it, Ben. We'll start with you. Speaking of the Skins, they're at home hosting the San Francisco 49ers. Here's another game where the 49ers, look, I totally do believe in their defense, but that doesn't mean they haven't had a pretty easy schedule in terms of facing lackluster offenses this season. This game has a sub 40-point total, 39.5. The Skins have a implied total below 15 points. 24.8 for San Francisco. They're 10-point favorites on the road. Let's get this out of the way first. The Washington Redskins don't have Chris Thompson. Outside of Terry McLaurin, Thompson's your best playmaker, which is pretty wild, but he's sidelined. So you have Adrian Peterson. Maybe he's more involved in the passing game, but it's a very difficult matchup. Very tough spot for Terry McLaurin as well, coming off that 2-touchdown game against the Xavier Howard-less Dolphins. It really just feels like a tough and ugly spot for the Washington Redskins, despite being at home.
Oh, it's definitely ugly. The question for me is more, is the entire game ugly? Because I don't think it's the greatest spot for the Niners in the sense, coming off a big win against the Rams. They go to Washington. It is absolutely pouring there. The weather is terrible. Not to say that it overrides.
Have you seen the radar, though? It's that is a huge sell, like, throughout the entire Northeast.
It's not good. I don't know exactly what to make what we see. Now, obviously, for the Niners side, They want to run the ball naturally, so they should be able to control it. But for the Redskins, it's going to be tough sledding. You mentioned the low implied total. I don't have a ton of interest in trying to miracle reach. There's so many other spots. I will just throw it out there. If you think the game is very sloppy, the Redskins defense is naturally they're incredibly cheap though, sub 2K on DraftKings. So if you wanted to completely punt your defense, they are at home. They are in a sloppy game.
Right. I think that does make some sense at least. I would imagine the only thing that sucks about this is Washington's offense is going to put San Francisco's offense in a very favorable spot on multiple occasions.
No doubt. We've seen that with some bad, exactly, a couple turnovers, the Redskins defense could be coffined without even doing anything bad. So take it for what it's worth, but it's just a game that there's a lot of blah on both sides. Obviously, the Niners have some things working in the running game, and then you have George Kittle, who's the premier tight end on the slate.
Yep. And now that minimum salary is no longer 2K, it's $1,500. It definitely makes things a little bit different because you saw a ripple effect up throughout. It's not just certain teams, Alex, that are below 2K now, but the way that everything's priced is, the Seahawks might have been 3,300 2 weeks ago, and now they're 2,800. I want to obviously stick with this game, but what are your thoughts on punting defense now that we've seen it get so cheap?
Yeah, punting defense is always not a bad idea because you could get lucky with some sort of fluky touchdown no matter what team you pick. So that's really what you're looking for. And really that helps you get stronger players to fill out your lineup. So I think it can be a good strategy.
How are you approaching the Redskins today, if at all?
So I think Washington's on the upswing. If with the Nationals in the World Series, maybe that'll spill over to the Redskins here because they need a little bit of narrative on their side.
They need a lot bit of narrative.
The injuries in this game are pretty relevant. So Chris Thompson being out gives a little bit of a bump to Adrian Peterson because I don't think Wendell Smallwood will be as involved in the offense. So I think he makes a nice kind of contrarian play. The matchup is very tough though, so not a core play here. And then on the 49ers side, Deebo Samuel is out, so a murky kind of 49ers rotation for wide receiver becomes a little bit easier to predict. But they also have Jordan Matthews in the mix now, so he's expected to be active for this game. So really, not too excited about any of the receivers here, but I might take some shots on Goodwin or Pettis.
Okay. Yeah, with Deebo Samuel out, Pettis would be the guy I think I'd turn to, if anywhere. Like you had mentioned when we had a question on Twitter the other day, how much do you take weather into consideration? You had said that, it's already factored into Vegas, so there is that. But Ben, at the same time, the thing that sucks is even if you're not worried about weather, it's still a team that wants to run the football 40 plus times a game.
Absolutely. It's not, I think that's the point to make. It's not something that we're talking about a team, well, now they might deviate from what they want to do and control it on the ground. The Niners want to do that, and now they're even more incentivized to do it. They're a 10-point favorite on the road. There's a lot of scenarios where the Niners really control time of possession, lean on the defense, lean on the stable of running backs, and, win a somewhat ugly, 21-10 type game. I don't think that's out of the cards. From a fan's perspective, obviously it's not ideal.
Is there anybody you like here? Are you targeting the run game at all?
It's tough because, Tevin Coleman's someone, we've seen him get the touches, but I hate trying to get something right multiple times. There is some room to take some stabs, but the pecking order, the touchdown variance, it's very difficult. And it's not just one other guy. They got guys all over the place running the ball. Kittle, if I have the money, I still think you can go and get him. I have no problem there. But at the same time, again, it's not a check all the boxes type situation.
Right. Any other interest for you here, Alex, with this run game for San Francisco?
I'll throw out that Mostert is questionable. And some people might think if he's ruled out, that may bump to Coleman and Breida, but I really don't think so because they have Jeff Wilson kind of lurking around, so he'll probably be the third running back if Mostert does not play.
Yep, good point. Let's talk about the Giants in Arizona, a far more favorable game, Alex. Second highest total. second highest over under on this entire slate. Pretty incredible. It's at 50. The game above that is up to 54.5, but you got 50-point over under. And the Giants amazingly have a 26.8 implied total here. That on this slate is the fourth highest among any of the, actually not just on the slate, on the week is the fourth highest among any teams playing. Meanwhile, you've got a respectable total for the Cardinals as well, 23.3. I think I really need to know what's going on with Christian Kirk. He isn't expected to play, though, so we have that. Ian Rappaport reported that this morning. But we'll start with Arizona. I think you could make an argument that, and I mentioned this on Sirius last night, that Fitzgerald and Murray might be like the best quarterback wide receiver pairing if you're just going one with the other. Grant Haley in the slot has been so bad this season. I mean, when I say he's been bad to the point where no one is allowed more yards in slot coverage. No one's allowed more yards after the catch. Nobody is allowed more yards per route or yards per snap. Like, he's been unbelievably bad. He's allowed 22 receptions on 27 targets. The list goes on with how bad Grant Haley's been, and Larry Fitzgerald's likely to see a whole lot of him today, which bodes incredibly well for him.
I like that a lot. His price tag has gone up. It really depends on what site you're playing on. On DraftKings at 6,100, Fitzgerald is a lot more expensive than FantasyDraft at 10.9, or FanDuel, he's the cheapest at 5,600. I think he'd be a snap cash play on FanDuel. On DraftKings, I'll probably reserve him to GPPs to some extent.
What about with this backfield situation? David Johnson is expected to play. It's just tough. Like, will he be limited? Will he see his full opportunities? If I had to guess, I would say that they'll probably use him similar to what we saw last week. But Chase Edmonds is a good backup. So you can give Chase Edmonds additional work and not really hurt this team from what we've seen.
Yeah, so last week, David Johnson saw 52 snaps. Chase Edmonds saw 20. So that's about a 70-30 split. So I think David Johnson should still be considered a pretty good play here. When it came down to runs, he got 13. Chase Edmonds got 5. So it's kind of breakdown I expect going forward. And they actually run the field at the same time for at least 3 plays here. So they might run David Johnson out of a wide receiver position a few plays during the game. And that'd be good for his production because he's really effective when he's running routes.
Ben, what do you make of the passing game for Arizona, where now that Christian Kirk is doubtful to play, you have Fitzgerald, and then you've got guys like Keyshawn Johnson and Damiere Byrd, none of whom have shown really any promise from a fantasy standpoint?
It's a really interesting situation because you've got a team that I think a lot of people are interested in, a game that a lot of people are interested in, but you don't want to force it in, but you're like, all right, I got my quarterback. I want to pair him up with a couple of weapons. You have Fitzgerald, easy. Who do you go to next? And it's a dicey situation. You shouldn't just plug a guy in because you want a 3-man stack. You got to be careful with that. Then we have David Johnson, who we know, he's one of the better pass catching backs in the league. And Edmonds, yeah, he's contributed. He's also found the end zone both weeks, which, on limited touches, I think is running pretty pure. We'll see if that regresses just a bit. So you have Cardinals, but at the same time, I'm not looking to force in one of those next receivers just to add more correlation to my lineup.
Okay. I think it's pretty reasonable, and I'm with you. Like, I don't. That's why I said that I like Murray and Fitzgerald as a just 1-and-1 pairing. It's really hard to fall in love with anyone else. What about David Johnson though? Would you be willing to pair him with Murray and Fitzgerald, knowing that his target totals have been really high over the past several weeks?
I think you can do it just because it's a pretty appealing game, and like you've mentioned, 24 targets over the last 3 games. He's definitely going to get some work there. It is a lot of salary to devote to the stack, I think. So you need to run, you're going to need to get those touchdowns, and it can certainly happen. But at the same time, David Johnson, it's an interesting situation. It was his back, now it's his ankle. I do worry a little because you mentioned Edmonds is a guy that if he is nicked up, they're pretty comfortable going to him. He's going to produce. So there is that downside, but at the same time, great matchup. I will certainly have some David Johnson shares.
Okay. On the other side of this game, then, Ben. Or actually, let me ask you about Murray. Where do you have him ranked among your quarterbacks this week?
Oh, he's up there. I think we're kind of seeing him start to put it together, and maybe I'm biased because I've seen him so much from college. I think the big game where he combines, the dual threat ability is coming. We've seen him a couple times salvage through the ground, and we saw like last week, he certainly got it done through the air. I have a feeling that sooner rather than later, he's going to have a game, where he rushes a couple in and still has that possibly 300-yard bonus upside. So I'm going to continue to play him. I think we're seeing, not to devolve the show, but kind of a changing of the guard where there are more and more dual threats out there. And it's really hard for a pure pocket passer to make up for 80 yards rushing or something like that. That's an extra 2 touchdowns. So it's guys like Murray that are rising in the ranks every single week.
Right. I love him this week as well. It's just who do you pair him with outside of Fitzgerald?
That's, very difficult.
Ben, the other side of this game, Daniel Jones gets his reinforcements here. And I got to tell you, I like him a lot this week. I think the price is reasonable. Outside of Sterling Shepard, who remains out, he gets Saquon Barkley back. Terrible run game without Barkley. And then Gallman got hurt, so you didn't even have him. Evan Ingram returns. Golden Tate's been back from that 4-game suspension for a little while now. And Darius Slayton has proven at least capable of being an outside receiver that can do things if you need him to. But look, this offense went from last week literally having no one outside of Tate, and I guess Slayton if you want to conclude him. Now you have Barkley back, one of the best running backs in the league, and one of the best, most productive tight ends in the league in Evan Ingram against an Arizona team that just as a result of their offense and the pace that they play at, they're going to free up more plays, and you're going to see a whole lot of plays run from both sides of the game. What are your thoughts on Daniel Jones?
Oh, it's hard not to like him too, and I think he's going to be a little lost. Most people, I feel, will lean to Murray in this spot, and we'll mention the Falcons and Rams in a little bit. Like you said, he's getting healthier. It's amazing that Saquon is back. He's the one I don't know what to do with. I think there's some merit if he's lower owned, paying all the way up. I don't think a lot of people are going to do that. Then we have Ingram, who's in the, we know how bad the Cardinals are against tight ends. Tate, I don't think he'll see Patrick Peterson much. That's a question, though, I'll pass back to you guys in terms of he does return for the Cardinals.
No, I think you're right. I think he will.
Yeah, I don't think so. So I have no problem going to him. And then, you have the luxury of running it back with a guy like Fitz or a guy with David Johnson.
Yeah, Patrick Peterson last year, I had it pulled up. I lost it. His amount of routes or snaps out of the slot was, I think, honestly, I might be more worried about it being Slayton that sees a lot of him, Alex. What are your thoughts on, we'll start with the wide receivers for the Giants, and we can tie that into Daniel Jones, of course.
I think Sterling Shepard being out opens up a little bit of opportunity for the wide receivers, expecting Cody Latimer to be the third wide receiver and Darius Slayton to be a WR2. So I think Slayton makes a nice play, even though he might have a tough individual matchup, but he's dirt cheap, and he's been effective when he's been on the field. He just hasn't seen that much action because of injury at the first part of the season. And last week, he played almost every snap. So I think that kind of level of being on the field should be huge for his price tag, and I'm really looking at him as kind of a value option today.
Yeah, I'm with you here. Really appealing spot, and one of the games that I definitely like most. How about Barkley? If you look across the sites, it definitely makes a difference, and we've seen that. We're going to see that honestly with a lot of players this week, where a lot of them, I don't want to say they're site specific, but to some extent they're a lot more appealing on one site than they are on the other. For example, Saquon Barkley on Yahoo is really, really, I won't say really, really discounted, but $35. That means he's $5 cheaper than Dalvin Cook, Alex, and only $3 more than Leonard Fournette, only $4 more than Aaron Jones. But at the same time, guys like Ezekiel Elliott are $28. Really interesting running back pricing on Yahoo this week, Barkley being included.
Yeah, we're kind of seeing a changing of the guards here, where Dalvin Cook is now the highest priced back in fantasy.
Yep.
Last
When
year,
Christian McCaffrey's not on the slate, yeah.
well, fair. I forgot about that buy there. So I think Barkley. I mean, this is an amazing matchup for the Giants because of the pace of play and the weakness of Arizona's defense. And I think Barkley will take a hit, though, with Daniel Jones at quarterback because there will be less passes to the running back in bailout situations. So I think that, all in all, that kind of evens out, and it's a good spot for Barkley, but not a great one. And because he is one of the best fantasy players in the league, I think that I'm going to have some good shares of him.
Okay. Ben, how about Barkley?
Yeah, I think it's worth taking a shot. Now, I haven't seen anything where they're saying that he's going to be limited anyway. He looks ready to go. And as Alex mentioned, this is as good as you're going to get matchup wise. So there's no reason for a guy like that who, with Daniel Jones dumping it off to him, he's got all the upside you could ask for. And I think more people are going to say, you know what, let me just take a wait and see. I'm not sure where he's at. That's a time in tournaments. It's actually the time to buy because you can still get that ceiling and certainly the ownership won't be there.
Yeah. And something else to consider. If you look at how these two teams have performed against pass-catching running backs, Football Outsiders has the Arizona Cardinals 31st, better than only the Dolphins this year, and the New York Giants 30th, Ben. So both teams have very talented pass-catching backs. Both teams have really struggled in that department, and I think we'll see that kind of elevated today even more so.
Yeah, I think this is a game you can really attack in a lot of ways. It's just trying to mix it up, and then if you are stacking, which certainly a lot of people will, where do you put your one-offs and how do you get leverage?
Yep. Anything else, Alex, from this game? There is a lot to touch on. I want to make sure we don't miss anything on what should be one of the more popular games on the day.
I think Kyler Murray is really interesting because looking at our ownership projections, his ownership varies wildly based on the site you're playing on. So on, let's see, on FantasyDraft, he's only 3.3% owned. But on, let's see, I think FanDuel was the one he's highest at 14%. So that's almost 4.5 times as many people having him on FanDuel than FantasyDraft. So that's a good reason why, we can give you good advice overall, but really the specifics of the particular tournament you're playing are different compared to the overall projection for the game. So you want to make sure to check the information for the site you're playing on.
For sure. Ben, anything else on this one, either side?
No, I think that's well said. You can identify there's a bunch of plays that are playable. It's just about putting them in the right lineups, in the right structure, on the right site.
Okay. Let's move on then. That's one of the bigger ones, which will take up a lot of our time. But talking about the Indianapolis Colts and Houston Texans, Ben, back to you here. Pretty appealing spot for a guy like Hilton, who I think we should expect to see decent amount of ownership. Particularly on DraftKings, where his salary is down to $5,900, 46.5 over under. Both teams with a total around 23, 24. Colts being favored by only 1 point at home. So I don't know how much I like here, honestly. T.Y. Hilton's obviously the one that stands out, and the field has also taken an interest in him, it seems.
Yeah, I think people are, we know how good he is in the dome at home. We haven't seen him in a while. He was hurt. They were off the slate. They had a bye. It's been since that Falcons game weeks ago. But now he is back and he's an appealing price. This game, though, we have two really polarizing 50-plus total. I think this is a sneaky game if you want to go against the grain, if you're running a bunch of teams to look at. Jacoby Brissett's not going to be popular. He does have some mobility. He's at home against the Texans defense that I think can be exploited. We just mentioned Hilton, I think, is in a great spot. You have guys like Marlon Mack or the tight ends. Then on the other side, DeAndre Hopkins still has not really put together that game. I think this is as good a time as any if he's going to get it going. I know it's been a down year, but the Colts kind of keep everything in front of them. I think it hurts a guy like Will Fuller a little more. Maybe Hopkins has one of his, 10-plus catch type performance.
I hope so. He needs it.
He does.
Also, I agreed to do a fantasy football pie bet with Howard Bender from Fantasy Alarm. We got Manny into that as well, and they gave me the 5th pick. I don't know why. They act like it was randomly generated, but out of 5 people, I get number 5. I don't buy it. But it comes down to it, and Ben, DeAndre Hopkins is still on the board. How do I not take DeAndre Hopkins? Basically, you take a pie to the face if your receiver is the worst of the week. I got to go with Hopkins here, regardless of what we've seen over the past couple of weeks.
It's amazing how fast. I know we just talked about at the top of the show. Oh, it's week 7 already. A couple big performances, and no one will even remember his slow start. It can change so fast, and I don't have him dead and buried. We know how good, with Mahomes going down, Deshaun Watson is in the thick of the MVP race. He's got all the upside in the world. So this is a game indoors. I don't think is going to be nearly as noticeable because we have those other really, really prime opportunities. I wouldn't mind taking some stabs in this game and hoping you do get something that goes into a shootout.
Okay. Yeah, how about you, Alex?
Man, I'm just not really on this T.Y. Hilton train, and this could really bite me big. I could lose all my money if he has a huge day here. But the numbers that I'm looking at just don't add up for him having a great projection here. So I think one thing that I'm concerned about is his yards per reception this year are only 9.7. So that's a lot lower than the 15.7 career average we're accustomed to. He has caught 80% of these passes, so not bad on a per pass basis. Jacoby Brissett averaging less than 7 yards per pass on the season. They don't pass very often. I have them projected to pass about 53% of the time to 47% running in this game. And there are some wide receivers. I know Paris Campbell is out, but they have Pascal, Rogers, and Kane kind of in a rotation. They have a couple tight ends on several plays with Doyle, Ebron, and Mo Ali Cox. So I think I'm just not really I'm not really seeing it.
Fair enough. Look, I think it's a valid point for sure. I do, but I'll say one thing though. I think there's a bit of a trade-off here in that, on one hand, the yards per reception is concerning. On the other hand, he's not being used as just a deep guy. And in his first 4 games, mind you, he went out with that injury midway through one of them, and then was sidelined for the next. But you look at his red zone targets. He had 3 red zone targets in week 1, 1 in week 2, 3 red zone targets in week 3. And Frank Reich's clearly looking to involve him in more ways than just one. So I think it is a little bit concerning that, knowing that maybe that deep threat potential isn't what it was with Andrew Luck. Well, we know it isn't. But I also think that he's still going to be pretty heavily involved based on the way that he's been utilized in this offense.
Yeah, I hope you're wrong, man.
I definitely could be. I don't know. Ben, is there anyone else from this game?
No, I think that's the crux of it. You can, if you're stacking the game, someone like Marlon Mack is not going to be, I think on most people's minds. You could take maybe a one-off with some of these secondary type pieces. I don't think that's as necessary unless you're really going heavy on the game. Alex, I want to ask you real quick, with something like T.Y. Hilton in this spot, Lofty kind of just touched upon this. We only saw him for kind of like 3.5 games. Do you maybe hold a little less water into seeing maybe it's a different change, or you think that it just could be we haven't seen a full season and it'll regress back to maybe, because I noticed that as well, that his yards are down a little bit in that regard.
Yeah, I think that it's not as bad as maybe it looks based on some of those stats, but he's ran 122 routes this year, been targeted 29 of them, so that's pretty comparable to last year's kind of target rate. And I'm expecting him to play like almost a full game here, so I think that I just am not that high on Brissett being a really good quarterback here, and their game plan this year has really shifted more to the run. With Luck, they're running less than 40% of the time. Now they're running 48% of the time. So that's just more plays that T.Y. Hilton can't be targeted.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Alex, do you have anything else from this game?
I think that Houston could go overlooked because it is kind of expensive to get to some of these guys, especially Hopkins. He hasn't really produced, but we know that he's a top wide receiver, and there's a lot of variance in the outcomes at that position. So I think going for Watson, Hopkins stack could be the pick to be contrarian spot.
Okay. We'll stay with you, Alex. Go to Green Bay and Oakland here. Honestly, right now, I don't have much idea at all what we're going to get out of Green Bay today. Now, I'll give you the the line and the total. 47 over under. The Packers are still 5-point favorites, but they opened as 6.5-point favorites. 26 implied total for them, 21 for Oakland. Just kind of setting the table here. Josh Jacobs is likely going to be very popular at his discounted price point, especially knowing that the Green Bay Packers are going to be shorthanded in some form or fashion. We just don't know what. So that's what it comes down to. Alex, you have Geronimo Allison, who was doubtful and then upgraded to questionable. Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who didn't practice, but now the Packers are optimistic that at least one of MVS or Geronimo Allison will be able to play. Devontae Adams has already been ruled out. So if it turns out that, by the way, none of the three practice. One's been ruled out, one was doubtful to questionable, one has been questionable. If one of them plays, Allen Lazard is probably still going to be your number two. If none of them play, he's minimum salary and he's going to have to be basically your number one by default. It's a tough situation, and I think we need more news before we can really do anything here.
That's true. That we could use some more news, but I have a decent read on this. I think that Geronimo Allison being upgraded to questionable means that he's the concussion protocol is not a factor anymore, because from what I understand about that, you can't be questionable. I don't think he'd be upgraded if he was still under risk of missing the game for that. Valdez-Scantling is a big question mark, so that'll be pretty relevant. I think that Allen Lazard is kind of the popular play in the public here, because on Monday night he had that big game. But the bottom line is he just isn't really, to this point, he hasn't been on the field very much. The last game, he came on when Geronimo Allison was kind of removed from the game because of that concussion, but he only played 17 of 74 snaps. The week before that, he played 1 snap. And if Marquez Valdez-Scantling and Allison are both in, I mean, this is a slam dunk fade for me. If Valdez-Scantling is out, I think Lazard is somewhat reasonable, but because of the popularity, I'm a little bit wary of going there. I think that maybe going to Kumaro, a guy who has figured into the offense more up to this point, and he even played most of the game last week with both Valdez-Scantling and Allison in. I think that makes a lot more sense than going to Lazard.
Okay. Ben, are you reticent to play a guy like Allen Lazard in the event that only one of these guys in Allison or MVS is out?
That would be the toughest spot. If both of them are in, it's as Alex said. If Allen Lazard beats me, then good job, everyone. If they're both out, it's hard not to at least consider him, just because they have to keep him on the field. They literally do not have other options. The spot is if one of the, say MVS doesn't play, I think I'm more apt to fade, because I think the narrative surrounding that is going to be, oh, Lazard's going to be super involved, and I'm not sure that's the case. Yes, he will have some opportunities, but this is still a guy that I think the range of outcomes, there's a lot of games where he returns a couple catches for, middling yards and no touchdown, and getting 2.5x on a 3K min salary guy is just not going to cut it, especially with what we've seen. Scores are up across the league. It's really hard to overcome that. So I'm more apt to let other people chase Lazard unless we get clarity that he's going to really be involved.
Okay. I guess the only reason it's difficult is because he is the dead man. So it opens things up. But at the same time, this is one of those weeks where I don't really know if you desperately need those punts.
That too. Like we talked about Saquon. I get the merit to going to him, but you're not I don't have many teams where I'm like jamming. Now, if you want to be different, say you're saying I want Saquon and Dalvin Cook. That's a really unique type of build, and you can be different. But I'm not sure that most rosters are really falling that way for me. And again, as Alex said, Kumarov is a guy. You could say most of the same things about Lazard as you could him, and he's not getting nearly as much talk out there. So there are other options, even if you want to get one of these under the radar Packers pass catchers.
What about the other side in Oakland? No Tyrell Williams. Of course, Darren Waller's been very productive. He's yet to score, but he's been heavily involved. Target share almost 30% this season. And then Josh Jacobs. I mean, you're getting him at a pretty sizable discount on some sites, specifically DraftKings.
Yeah, what we've seen early from the Packers this year seems to be, your boys. You were there, Luffy. Eagles controlled that game on the ground, ran it down their throat.
Yeah,
I would think that would be the Raiders' game plan. I worry a little bit about Waller seeing massive coverage, almost double coverage, where they try to bracket him without Tyrell to keep them more honest in the secondary. So we saw what Jacobs did in London against the Bears, which is, it's a world, not even the same category of run defenses. So I think he has all the opportunity in the world to have a good game here.
Do you like him, Alex, or is it going to be a too chalky spot for you? What do you think?
I think this could be good chalk. I think that Jacobs and Waller just are too cheap. Tyrell Williams being out just gives a little bit more volume to both of them. And the wide receiver situation here is very kind of in flux because Williams is out, so you got Trevor Davis being the wide receiver one. There's a little bit of revenge narrative there going against the Packers. So, if you're a narrative player, then that could be a fun one. Then we got Hunter Renfrow and Keelan Doss as the wide receivers 2 and 3. So I think that probably not that excited about any of these guys. You got Zay Jones and Marcel Aitman kind of in the backup roles here. So I think they got a pretty large rotation going on. And none of these guys really get targeted at a high rate when they're on the field. So I think Waller will get a lot of looks. There is some concern maybe they game plan to really smother him. So that could happen, but I think he's worth the risk.
Okay. Yeah, I think he's worth the risk too. What about Darren Waller?
Oh, sorry, I was talking about Waller. Jacobs, I think.
My fault. I was trying. That's on me.
Jacobs, I like as well. Oh, well. He's only 5K on DraftKings, 10.6 on FantasyDraft. These are really cheap prices for a guy with as much volume as he has. I'm projecting him for 17 rushing attempts here, so this is one of the higher volume guys in the league. And it's not a matchup where Oakland's going to win most of the time, but when they do, Jacobs is surely going to have a good game. The only caveat I'd have is that I probably wouldn't play Jacobs and Waller in the same lineup. I'd probably choose one or the other.
Okay, Ben, what about you? Would you play the two in the same lineup? And where would you put Jacobs in that 5K range of running backs? Like, do you have him just head and shoulders above guys like Joe Mixon and Kerryon Johnson and Lat Murray and Frank Gore and Devontae Freeman? There's a lot of options in that 5 to 5,500 range.
So what did we make it? 41 minutes and Joe Mixon go to the window, folks.
You knew it was coming.
It's coming, all right. There are a lot of mid-range guys, but Jacobs, I think the volume is going to be there. And yes, the Raiders are underdog and most likely they lose, but it's not, they win this game a decent clip of the time. They're a 5-point underdog. And when they do, as Alex mentioned, Jacobs is going to have, I would say, 20-plus carries in those type games. So the volume justifies it. Certainly would not roll him and Waller in the same lineup, though.
Okay. Yeah, me neither. Ben, I'll stay with you. We go to Detroit. Lions taking on the Minnesota Vikings. The Lions have played decent enough football. They lost to the Stripes. They lost to the refs last week. I truly believe that game that was just horrendous officiating. Look, they still lost. Fine, whatever. I'm the furthest thing from a Lions fan, but it was ugly. And 43.5 over under here. They got a 20.5 total, 23 for the Vikings. This game opened with the Vikings as 2-point dogs. They're now 2.5-point favorites. So we've seen a pretty significant swing here. Ben, what do you make? Is there anyone that stands out to you that you really like in this game, starting with Dalvin Cook?
I certainly like Dalvin Cook, no doubt about it. He is expensive. It's just, the Vikings have kind of, and I think they needed to do this eventually. Thielen and Diggs kind of pushed it. They are becoming a little more balanced as they should. Cousins has shown he can at least get it done. We saw Diggs explode last week, but this should be a Dalvin Cook game. Outside of, he had 2 brutal matchups with the Bears and the Eagles, and it slowed him down. Outside of that, every other game this year, 110 plus yards on the ground and really good production. I think the Lions fall more into that category of defense. So this is a game, even though the Vikings are taking money, very competitive type. I think they lean on Dalvin Cook in terms of volume, and he really should produce.
I'm with you here. If you're looking at, say, Yahoo, where Cook is $40, Barkley's $35, Fournette's $32, Elliott's $28, do you find it harder to prioritize him there than you would on a site like, say, FantasyDraft or DraftKings, where Barkley on Draft or FantasyDraft is the most expensive. Dalvin Cook is quite a bit cheaper, $1,700, $16,007 for Barkley, $15,000 for Cook. So again, there's a lot of site specifics, I think, here for certain players. Dalvin Cook being one of them.
Sure, absolutely. I do think that's always a delicate balance, though, because the ownership correlates with that as well. So when you have a guy who's quote unquote, like on Yahoo, he seems overpriced or really premium. If you really think he explodes, it's almost a better buy there, because if you get it right, you're going to be with a lot less people up top, but you got to be price sensitive as well.
Right. Alex?
I just got a note here that we need to ask for likes. So on my channel, my best Chris Spags here, our picks are only as good as the amount of likes we have. So, I mean, if we don't get many likes, my T.Y. Hilton fade is going to totally eat me alive here. So, help me out here with some thumbs up. This game, I think that the Vikings have really leaned on the run, and being a favorite in this game, I see no reason why they wouldn't do that. I think that Diggs and Thielen, they've kind of seen their prices go up to a point where they're not really more than GPP plays, so I'm probably fading them. I think Ben's right on with kind of the Dalvin Cook thing. He is extremely expensive on 3 of the 4 sites, so that's a reason to stay away there. And they only have a 23 team total. I think the Lions more of a GPP play, but they should have to pass the ball a decent amount to stay in this game, so I can see go into a stack there.
Okay. Yeah, I could see it. I'm just not really all that enthusiastic. Curry Johnson's been – Alex, if you look at Curry Johnson's production this year, outside of that game against the Chiefs, who are just god-awful in run defense, he's averaged 2.6 yards per attempt, 1.8, 3.4, 3.1. He has less than 50 rushing yards in all but one game. It's been ugly for him. And outside of a few, long receptions, you're just seeing nothing big at all from Curry and Johnson this year.
Yeah, and it's a really tough matchup versus the Vikings D here. They're good against the run, and I think that the Lions working in J.D. McKissick as the number 2 back now is a downgrade to Kerryon Johnson, because J.D. McKissick's real strength is out of the backfield catching passes. So I think when they're really trying to pass the ball, I think that he might be in on the play. So I think Kerryon Johnson is kind of a GPP play in my mind.
Ben, any interest outside of Dalvin Cook?
Not really, to be honest. It is. We'll see. The Vikings are much better at home, which this game is not, but they are a strong defense, pretty balanced in terms of it's hard to attack. So, in a way, if I was really looking to it, I would probably just stack up the Lions and run it back, because the Vikings are always a good team. You have condensed production, but I don't know how often that works. You're going to get minuscule ownership on Stafford and those receivers, but it is a really tough ask to think that they can score enough to justify that.
I think you're right. I think we can move on as well then, go to Cincinnati. And because we're going to Joe Mixon, I have to start with you, Ben. Look, we ran a poll on Awesemo Radio yesterday, and I knew what the results were going to be. Just as we did last week, we asked, who's your favorite value running back? I had Carlos Hyde in there. That was the guy that a lot of us liked quite a bit, and he ended up basically getting a very little amount of attention in that poll. But, of course, Malcolm Brown was wildly popular. So yesterday we asked the same question, except with these 5K running backs. And lo and behold, Josh Jacobs is the one that got the large majority, 50%. It was which running back in the 5K range are you targeting this week in DFS for DraftKings? You had Devontae Freeman at 5,400, Frank Gore at 52, Joe Mixon at 5K, and Josh Jacobs at 5,000. So I just want to read this to you and then let you go ahead and give me your take. Jacobs 50%, Freeman 23%, Mixon and Gore at 14 and 13% respectively. So people have given up on Joe Mixon despite him being the cheapest he's been all year.
This has got to be it, right? This is the spot.
I hope, man. Against the bottom-ranked run D, I hope.
If he can't do it here, the Jaguars, you just mentioned it, the bottom-ranked rushing defense in games where the Bengals
dead last, according to Football Outsiders.
Dead last. And this is a game, I know Cincinnati is bad. They are the line is moving against them too, but they are at home and they are right now I see 4.5 on my screen. So it should be a competitive game. In games like the Cardinals game and some of those, we've seen Mixon get up there in terms of 20 touches. I don't think that's unreasonable for this type of spot against the defense that really should allow him. I know that offensive line is horrible, but he should have his chances. He has no rushing touchdowns on the year. If he falls in the end zone here, and this is as good a shot as he's going to get, I think it's a really interesting pivot off guys like Freeman, off some of these other type, who I see the merit to playing them. But Joe Mixon, to me, is not just going to have 16 bad games. I do think there will be some good ones in there.
I hope so, man.
Get it done today, for God's sake.
I hope so. The run blocking has been very bad, but Jacksonville allows the second most yards per attempt or 32nd in run defense DVOA. I mean, something's got to give, Alex, but I don't know. I'm beginning to lose faith in old Joe Mixon.
Yeah, man. The Bengals have really looked bad so far, especially in the primetime games where they've been on. And they're going to have to really dig deep to dig out of this one. I just looked up a Bengal to see what that is because I never really thought about it, but their performance.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Like a Bengal tiger?
Oh, I mean, when I Googled it, it's like just this like really normal cat. So that's more like the way they've been playing. Anyway, I think that.
Set you up for that one.
Yeah. I like Mixon as kind of a contrarian call there by you guys. I could really burn some money on this team because I'm going back to Tyler Boyd. I think that his performance, he hasn't put up any big fantasy games, but on a per play basis, it hasn't been bad. He's caught 2/3 of his passes for 10.4 yards per reception, and that's about in line with the team's passing efficiency. So I think that he's getting the volume. If you get some good variance on your side, he could easily win you a GPP. Auden Tate also. Those two guys make up a large majority of the passing, so that makes a nice stack. And Alex Erickson has become the clear number 3 receiver, and he's dirt cheap. He could be a pivot away from Allen Lazard.
All right. Ben, I'm curious to know outside of Mixon where you are on Tyler Boyd and Auden Tate with A.J. Green ruled out a couple days ago.
Tyler Boyd, I also really like. There's no better time just in a vacuum to go to a guy. A lot of people last week looked to him, and Marlon Humphrey. That guy is serious business right now on the Ravens. He really did number on him. So I think people are going to look at that. He burned a lot of people, and it's just, the Bengals are just an afterthought. Well, we can still go to Boyd. The volume is going to be there. This is certainly Jalen Ramsey's not walking through that door at that point. I think with the Jaguars defense, what it is right now, you can look to some Bengals and feel pretty comfortable despite them being god-awful.
I hope so, man. This team has really disappointed me this season from a fantasy standpoint. I mean, real life, you expected them to be bad, but it's brutal. Ben, on the other side, Leonard Fournette might be the highest owned player I've had all season. And I know, like, when it comes to chalk, maybe you get away from certain players. I just don't know how I get away from him against a team that's allowed 250 or more rushing yards in back-to-back games, 3 of 6 games on the season, ranks toward the bottom of the league in run defense and pretty much all defense. They've just been terrible. The Cincinnati Bengals I don't know how they stop a guy in Fournette who, outside of Christian McCaffrey, and actually the only one on this slate that sees the amount of volume he does every single week.
Before you got here, me and Alex were talking before the show about Fournette, and it's just, the guy doesn't come off the field, and he just, you summed it up. The volume is out of control. The price isn't really adjusting. He started slow, and I don't know why the sites haven't really caught up. So he's going to be popular, but I don't know how you really don't look to him on a lot of your lineups. It's just everything you want to see. And even when he doesn't have it going on, he gets so many opportunities. You don't need to be that efficient when you get that type of work.
Right. Yeah, it's tough to get away from him, Alex.
Yeah, I think this is a good example of good chalk. This is a guy who is in an amazing matchup for Cincinnati, where he's the top fantasy player on the team, like undisputed as far as volume, and he's not the max price. So I think that you're just getting too good of a value for Fournette today.
Yep, I think so too. I just don't know how. I do want to point out that it is a little bit different on, say, DraftKings Fantasy Draft and then on Yahoo. Do you want to touch on that just for a second, Alex, and give your thoughts? Because just for example, Berkeley's 8,900 on DraftKings, Cook is 8K, and then Fournette's at 7,000 on Yahoo. Leonard Fournette is not that much cheap. Like, Berkeley's 35 and Fournette's 30, so he's the third highest priced running back on the slate with Alvin Kamara sidelined, and he's cheaper than Aaron Jones on DraftKings.
Man, are you serious? That's insane. Anyway.
Yeah, he's cheaper than Aaron Jones. It's insane. It really is insane.
Fournette is my top projected running back on the slate, so I think that the fact that he's not the max price, I think I'm going to be on him a lot.
Okay. Yeah, Alex, talk to me about this passing game, and also the fact that Minshew has actually done a decent amount with his legs. Cincinnati's been ravaged by running quarterbacks over the last couple of weeks. But DJ Shark and D.D. Westbrook, any interest here?
I think it's easy to be overly optimistic about Shark because he's been amazing this year. He's averaging 88 yards per game, 5 touchdowns. And the reason I think that's not sustainable is because he's averaging 12 yards per target. Unless he's the second coming of Randy Moss, I think that is probably him getting lucky to some extent. So I think I'm willing to kind of fade that kind of hype, and I'll have him in stacks because I think that the Jags stack is pretty contrarian with everyone being on Fournette. I might go to D.D. Westbrook on Yahoo where he's $12. That's a nice price. But these are really kind of like deep dart throws for me.
Ben, thoughts on the passing game here, including Minshew?
I see some merit to going to it under the radar. It's pretty condensed between those two. DD is going to play. The targets have been there. It's just Shark is getting these, as Alex said, explosive plays, finding the end zone, whereas Westbrook, he's getting 8-10 targets, but it's not really materializing. I still have, as the price continues to plummet, and the ownership won't be there, I have some interest. Maybe it's just kind of using him in certain spots, but it's really not a game. There are just so many others with so much appeal that I have trouble being, overweight to the extent of where I'm really game stacking this a ton.
Okay. Do you want to touch on anything else from either side before we move on?
No, I will say I like to give a hot take. I think that Cincinnati can hang in this game. I wouldn't be stunned if they got their first win here.
Okay. We've heard that before.
They're winning sometime. Them and the Dolphins both can't go winless. Let's not get crazy.
Dude, there are a lot of bad teams this year.
Horrible. The league is just the range of how, Patriots with 10 men against some of these bad teams would be very interesting.
Yeah. That's
bad.
a valid point for sure. Oh, man. Alex, speaking of bad teams, Buffalo, Miami. How about this, man? The Buffalo Bills have the highest implied point total of any team today, 29.3. I don't really have a ton of interest in having like Josh Allen with John Brown and Cole Beasley, but I don't want to ignore this team either. They have a near 30 implied total, the Buffalo Bills. and the over-under is 41.5. Unsurprisingly, because Miami's implied total is 12.3, the lowest on the slate. They're 17-point dogs on the road. Of course, Buffalo Bills defense here is wildly appealing. But let's talk about Josh Allen and company first.
I'm a little hesitant to go to the passing attack here because, they're playing Miami, so that makes it seem like it sets up more for the run. And for them to really excel in passing on more than just like maybe one of these guys going off, they need some competition as far as points. So with all that in mind, I have my top stacks tool to calculate the probability based on all these factors, and I came up with Buffalo at a 3.3% chance of being the best passing stack of the day. And the problem is Josh Allen is 7% owned projected. So I think that I'm going to be fading these guys.
All right, well, let me stay with you for a second then and kind of dig into this a little bit more. Are you going to fade the entire team? Because in some spots, like on DraftKings, for example, Frank Gore is the same price as Josh Jacobs and Mixon and Devonta Freeman, more expensive than some of them, as a matter of fact. Same goes for FantasyDraft. But then on Yahoo, you've got Frank Gore, really similar to Freeman and Breida and Curry and Johnson and these guys. So how does this shake out for you when you're looking at this team that, again, has a 29, almost 30-point total? But is there anyone that really stands out to you? Like, do you like John Brown as a one-off? Kind of just run through this so we have a better picture of what's going on.
Yeah, I think that in cash, Josh Allen as kind of a one-off quarterback could make sense. I think that the problem becomes like when you're trying to stack up the team. So I think he'd be the kind of the cash play from this team, as well as the Miami defense, which is going to be super chalky. Buffalo defense. I have Miami projected to throw 1.5 interceptions on average with Fitzmagic, as they call him, at the QB position. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets benched after one half with what's been going on there. So I think our Buffalo defense is surely the top defense of the week, and they're going to be chalky, but I don't hate it because Miami is that bad. Frank Gore is hard to really love in fantasy. I prefer him on the 0.5 PPR sites, FanDuel and Yahoo, where you're not getting docked for his lack of receptions. Singletary coming back is a little bit of a downgrade for his production, though.
Okay. Ben, really same question for you. What do you do with a Bills team that has a near 30-point total? But as we've seen with teams like Dallas and the Chargers and such, it's very difficult actually to predict what's going to happen against Miami because they're so bad in both facets of the game, or on defense, run defense and pass defense, that you can just attack them any way you want and just stick with that. And oddly enough, with Dallas, we actually saw it was Amari Cooper against Xavier Howard that had the biggest game, and then Austin Eckler against them. But Keenan Allen didn't do anything, nor was he needed. So what do you think happens? And if you don't know, I'm happy to listen to that as well, because it's
first of all, I just don't understand, how did Singletary get? He was hurt and his price has just been rising.
It's absurd. It's
like what? Because I really think that he could. That's the problem with this is you just said it, Lofty. There's going to be a lot of guys, I think, on the Bills that turn in pretty solid performances, and that's really what we've seen with the Dolphins. Whereas Gore is not going to bust, Singletary, but are they going to give you enough to really get into the lineups? My answer most likely is no. Josh Allen, high floor, of course. John Brown, we know what he can do on the outside, but how often are they going to need to really air it out if their defense is forcing turnovers and they're up, 21-3 at halftime? I don't think too often. I will say that I can't believe that on DraftKings, a 4,000 plus defense that's going to be chalk, I have some interest in. That is insane. That is like a pure fade in a vacuum every single time. But I think it speaks to how bad the Dolphins are, especially on the. They're 17-point underdog against the Bills. It's insane. I really don't know what else to say. I still will try to get away from that defense where I can, but at the same time, it's hard to really just cancel them because they can break the slate.
I mean, yeah, when you're looking at what are the chances that this team has a defensive touchdown against Miami, they're not as low as you'd think for a defense. I mean, it's pretty ridiculous. This is a spot where, like you said, very very seldom are you paying a premium for a defense. In a spot like this, you have to at least ask yourself, is this by far the best defensive play and worth paying for?
Yeah, like I said, an expensive, popular defense is to me one of the easier spots to fade almost every time because defense is so random in a lot of ways.
Right.
But the Dolphins really challenged that narrative. So we'll see. I still think there is a giant range of outcomes where the Bills defense gets you 8 to 10, and that can be really easily overcome in so many areas.
Okay. Well, I guess I have to ask you about the other side, Alex. Miami Dolphins, anything at all?
No. I think
we can. I'm happy to save time. We got a couple good games coming up. Ben, anything for Miami?
No. Nope.
All right.
I'll say this real quick. If you stack the Bills, I think you have to force someone in from Miami because I don't know how you get there without someone.
Okay. Yeah, I really, it's like I've said with the Patriots so many times this season. I'm tired of trying to figure out what's going to happen, and it honestly just feels easier to fade them as a whole. Like why chase the big game for either of these teams when there are many teams this week and individual players that are similarly priced or cheaper with the same upside. I think you might be getting cute trying to figure out which of these guys is going to be the best play. Could John Brown have a huge game? Of course he could. I think as a one-off he's fine. But he might only have 4 targets in this game because he's totally unneeded. I don't know. Anyway, FantasyDraft.com is the sponsor of the NFL Deeper Dive. It's the only rake-free daily fantasy site. They had the $300,000 guaranteed rake-free contest, the Hooters main event, but that filled already. So these contests are filling up really quick, but it's there every single week. And in case you haven't checked it out yet, they still have some big contests available, one of them being the $70,000 Wishbone. It's a Sunday-only contest, $4 to enter, and solid payouts in this one for sure. Here's how you can let me tell you what to do. Okay, so you can sign up at FantasyDraft.com with the referral code AWESEMO, AWESEMO. You get a 7-day free trial membership, FantasyDraft.com. It's the only rake-free DFS site in the industry, and they're running big contests every single week. Amazingly, that filled up already, but it just shows you that people are enjoying playing at FantasyDraft.com, and the prize pools are getting bigger as we've seen from this year. This year compared to last year and previous seasons before that. All the entry fees that are put into it by the players are paid back out to the players. So sign up with the referral code AWESEMO and get a 7-day free trial membership, FantasyDraft.com. All right, boys. Atlanta, Rams. Alex, 54.5 point over under here. Rams, 29 point implied total, 26 for the Falcons, who are 3-point dogs at home. This is a very, very popular game, from Kupp to Cooks to Woods to Goff to Ryan to Hooper to even Freeman. Like, there's just so much here. Let's dig into it, starting with you, Alex.
I think this is the game of the week as far as fantasy production. I mean, the total says it all. It's the highest total I've seen all year, 54. I think that Atlanta is always a great fantasy option because they have a great passing offense and a weak defense, so that leads to a high probability of the success in the passing game. Not too many weeks where they get off to too hot a start and then don't have to pass. And then on the Rams side, I mean, they get a benefit from this bad defense, so if Atlanta puts up a fight, they could put up huge fantasy performances.
Ben?
This is a game that's going to be the most popular, but at the same time, I think it also has the highest chance of success in terms of stacking it up. So everything you want. The Rams are a slight favorite in a game that should be competitive. They desperately need the game. It's indoors. It's more of a matter of, A, who do you want in your stacks? And then B, how do you be different? Because you're going to be with thousands of people who also stack up this game.
Okay, so where are your top spots here? I know it's a tough question to answer, but Who do you really like in this one? And if it's everybody, feel free to rattle them off.
So I think for me, the tricky part is the Jalen Ramsey situation. I assume he tries to take on Julio. Will he be – I guess I'm going to ask you, Lofty and Alex, feel free to chime in as well. Do you think a guy like that where it's a pure shadow needs to have an adjustment period, or can they just say, hey, go follow Julio around? I know you don't know our scheme.
It's a good question.
That's really where I'm at. If they played a zone or they played some type of integral defense, I would have more concern about Ramsey just coming in immediately. But if he's just going to straight follow Julio, I don't know how much he needs to really know about the Rams scheme as more just try to take Julio out of this game.
Assuming that's the case, how worried are you about Julio Jones?
I'm pretty worried. I mean, I know he's clearly in play, but at the same time, he's going to be popular because people are stacking the game. I actually like him if I do use him as a one-off against Matt Ryan. I think that won't be nearly as popular. I think you can stack Ryan with so many other options in those ATL stacks. If you use Julio by himself, that's a really different type of exposure to this game. And say for some reason it all goes to Julio, you have these dual threat quarterbacks elsewhere that we talked about. That can be a way to have a different type of lineup.
Julio Jones or DeAndre Hopkins?
For the price, Hopkins for me.
Okay. Alex, what are your thoughts here on Julio Jones and this Atlanta offense?
I like it. I think that he makes a good play. I mean, the matchup might not be the most amazing if Jalen Ramsey plays this game, but I mean, he's year in, year out, one of the best in the league. One thing this year I noticed is he hasn't been playing quite as many snaps as usual, so that I don't expect him to average 100 yards this season, but he'll be up there. And I think that there's so much variance at wide receiver that it's worth taking shots every week. And as far as the individual matchup, I think that really comes into play more on like the deep balls. On shorter routes, I wouldn't be as concerned.
Who do you like most from this game? And is there anybody that you're not particularly high on that, in game stacks you think you'll have less of than other players from this one? I mean, Todd Gurley returned to practice. He'll be active, but Atlanta's run defense actually hasn't been their weakness. And the Rams have not blocked well in the run game. Devontae Freeman on the other side, he's averaging some really pedestrian numbers this season. And if you dig into it, like last week, he came off his best game of the year. But it was a little bit misleading because both of his touchdowns and the majority of his points came through the air. I don't know. It's a weird spot. Like he doesn't have a rushing touchdown on the season. The Rams have given up 7 of them, but 3.6 yards per attempt. He's 28th in yards per contact after attempt, and that's among 33 running backs with 50-plus carries. It's not great. Only Miles Sanders has a worse rushing grade than Freeman too this season, like according to Pro Football Focus. So I don't know. There are a few spots on the ground. I don't know how much I love this ground game. I do love the passing game, but what's your take on it?
Yeah, I think you highlighted some reasons to be really concerned about the effectiveness of this Atlanta running game. They don't run at a very high rate either, which is a blow to Devonta Freeman for sure. I don't have him projected to run that much compared to other running backs, only 14 times. But at the same time, the game stack is so popular here. Like the counter strategies, you go for the game fade, you go for one team just dominating this game unexpectedly, where it's projected to be pretty close. So if you play that scenario, maybe taking a one-off Devonta Freeman or a one-off Todd Gurley, hoping the game is one on the ground, could be a good strategy.
Okay, yeah, Ben, what about you?
The ground game is certainly the more dicier situation. Taking either of these quarterbacks and pairing them up with the pass catchers that we know are going to be involved. I'm not saying that's automatically going to work, but it's hard to find many reasons why that's not viable. The ground game, I definitely think there's some more question marks, especially with Freeman. You're going to need him to continue to contribute in the passing game. And then Gurley, that is a really interesting situation. You've got Malcolm Brown doubtful. I assume he's not playing. And then you've got Darrell Henderson. Is he even viable if you wanted to go? We know that the Falcons historically really bad against pass catching backs, but what role he'll have at a dirt cheap price kind of remains to be seen.
All right. Well,
do you have any of him, just out of curiosity? Do you have any interest in Henderson?
I didn't, no. even when Gurley was out, it seemed like they were very hesitant to get him heavily involved. I know he had 6 attempts, but he just hasn't been okay. So I guess what you're saying, and it makes sense, is like Gurley is returning from an injury. He hasn't been himself this season. I know he doesn't have an injury designation, so it looks like he'll be perfectly fine. But I don't know. They've struggled to run the ball to begin with. And my expectation is that, assuming Jared Goff isn't as bad as he was last week, he can be close and he'll still have a huge game against Atlanta through the air. Their secondary, their pass defense is just god-awful.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like last week we saw Henderson, if 6 carries was honestly more than I thought. I was stunned more about the targets. I think for him to ever get there, he needs to have a Chris Thompson type role. And I'm interested to see what we get out of him today with this new dynamic in the Rams backfield.
All right. Alex, do you want to add anything to this game? It is, of course, like we both said, the highest projected highest over-under. Should see the most fantasy scoring and the most ownership as well.
Yeah, I think it's a good chalk. I mean, I only see green lights here.
All right. Ben, anything else?
No, fire it up. Great game to target, of course.
Sounds good. Tennessee and the Chargers, Ben. This should be a low-scoring game. The Chargers have been highly underwhelming. I mean, you get Melvin Gordon back, you've got Austin Eckler, you have Keenan Allen, you get Hunter Henry back. I know Hunter Henry had a big game last week, but that was just an utter failure at home against Pittsburgh. Not that home field advantage means much for the Chargers, but dude, they have a sub-20 implied total. Tennessee at 22.3, they're 1.5-point favorites, 42 over/under, pretty ugly here. But I actually want to start with Keenan Allen for a couple of reasons, and I haven't heard a ton of this discussed. But you look at the matchup that he's going to get more than half of the time today against Logan Ryan. It is really good. Like, Logan Ryan's allowing 1.2 yards per snap in the slot, 5th most yards in the slot, 3rd most yards after catch in the slot. That's where Allen's lined up on more than half of his snaps this season. So I think it's a very, very interesting spot. Another thing to consider, only Justin Coleman has been thrown at in the slot more than Logan Ryan this season. So it does feel like an opportunity for Keenan Allen to bounce back. He was vocal about his disappointment and his frustration on Twitter with the offense. Probably not the wisest decision, but he's below 7,000. He's 6,700 on DraftKings. At least deserves some conversation here.
He's someone, yeah. I mean, we used to think highest floor on him, and they've just been a disaster somehow. The Chargers need to get it in track, and he is someone that I think has some merit as a bounce-back candidate. Should be involved with this offense. I don't like the game, so I don't have much to say. It's a pretty slug-it-out, grind-it-out type. Tennessee is not a great team to target or play against for DFS purposes. So maybe someone like Keenan Allen, just because he's not going to be super popular and the price is really at a discount.
Okay. I think Keenan Allen, where you can get him discounted, is interesting. Projected for very low ownership, but he has a very high ceiling. And I actually like Derrick Henry in this game, especially in these half-point PPR sites where you're not as worried about the receptions at running back. What are you doing with Tennessee and the Chargers, Alex?
I like Henry. I think that Tannehill starting will be a boost to Henry because Mariota runs the ball more than Tannehill. So I think you can project Henry to get more of the rushing touchdowns here. So I think that's nice. I wouldn't be shocked if he has a kind of Nick Chubb kind of performance where he has huge yardage on the ground. It's a couple touchdowns to win you a slate. On the other side, I think Melvin Gordon is my bounce back preferred option. The prevailing narrative seems to be that he just stinks at football, but he's only played like 2 games or something, so I'll keep firing him up.
All right. Yeah, that's an interesting one with him. How much do you anticipate having a good amount?
He's more of a contrarian play. Definitely not standing out as far as a great value because Eckler. I am projecting him to kind of have a little bit more work than last week given the differential and how they performed. But I think Gordon still makes a nice play.
All right, what are your thoughts on the Titans and Derrick Henry?
Henry, I like kind of maybe taking one of the two running backs from this game. Whichever team wins, you might have a GPP winner there. The passing game is pretty much red flags everywhere for the Titans. I mean, maybe Corey Davis, but he's not even that cheap.
No, generally speaking, it's pretty ugly, Ben.
Oh, it's bad. I have some Chargers defense today. I think if they can get the lead here and really try to limit Henry, they could go to town on Tannehill.
Okay. Yeah, I think that could be the case. But they've also disappointed me. And I honestly think the Titans defense isn't even that crazy where they're cheap. I mean, Phillip Rivers has really struggled. They haven't been able to keep him upright. He has so many weapons, but they just haven't really been able to exploit them. And I wouldn't be surprised if both defenses, or at least one from either side, ends up having a pretty solid game here. But yeah, I do like Derrick Henry. More so on Yahoo. I think at $22, that's really appealing. And I also think that Keenan Allen is at least somewhat appealing where you can get him cheap, like on DraftKings. Let's move on here. Alex, Seattle and Baltimore. This should be a pretty fun game to watch, I think. But I do worry. Ben mentioned Marlon Humphrey earlier, shadowing receivers and really putting in work. Made Tyler Boyd's life miserable last week. 3 receptions for 10 scoreless yards on 7 targets. Likely going to see himself a whole lot of Tyler Lockett today. And Seattle's got a 26-point total, 23 for the Ravens, 49 over under, and the Seahawks are 3-point favorites at home. What are you thinking? Oh, and another thing too, Baltimore now has Marcus Peters. So is Marcus Peters going to spend a lot of time on DK Metcalf? I think that's very possible as well. Peters, according to Pro Football Focus at least, is having a very strong year.
So I think I have a pretty strong take on this game, I guess, because from what I understand, Seattle is going to be very popular. I mean, I kind of see this as a pretty good game to stack because of the total and the strength of the offenses. But Baltimore is kind of unique in the fact that they're averaging more than 7 plays per drive. Most teams average in the 5s. And if you break down games like I do, you assume that there's a certain number of plays that'll happen given the time length of the game. In this case, I have 123 plays. And Seattle averages about a normal amount of plays per drive. Baltimore is way above average, so I think Baltimore will run a lot more plays than Seattle in this game. And that doesn't mean they're going to be more successful with their drives because they run the ball so much to just get more first downs. But that does limit the number of plays for Seattle. So I'm not expecting huge yardage out of anyone.
Okay. Yeah, Ben, back to you here with Seattle. You talked about Humphrey. He has been very good. I mean, flat out been very strong in shadow coverage. Do we have some concerns about Lockett today? Because I do, especially if ownership is going to be significant. Right now, I want to see if we have an update. I don't think we do yet, but right now we're looking at, on DraftKings specifically, about 15. Do we have an update? No. 15% though. Still quite a bit on a deep slate.
No way I get there. To be honest, it's just I'm not going to allocate 1/5 of my lives to a game that it's funny because I think the Ravens defense in a lot of ways is overrated by name recognition, but in this specific situation, I actually don't really like the Seahawks either. Chris Carson is getting a ton of work. We've all talked about that throughout the year. So if you're looking for pure volume, he's one of those guys that 25 touches, not out of the realm. But at the same time, I'm not going to have any Seattle stacks today. I didn't have enough room for them, and I think I can get by without them.
How are you approaching Baltimore? I'll just say this: there were three teams where I said, maybe I'll get to the quarterback, but I don't want to pair him. I don't want to full game stack it. I don't want to pair him with 2 pass catchers. One of them was Lamar Jackson just because of his legs. Another one was Josh Allen, but I think we talked through that, and there's not a ton to feel great about there. And another was actually Kyler Murray, only because I could see a spot where you pair him with Larry Fitzgerald alone and then run it back with the Giants player and then fill it in with that Atlanta Rams game or whatever. I think that could work too. Like you said, you're not big on those peripheral guys for the Cardinals. But I think a similar argument can be made for Baltimore, where you've got Mark Andrews, and then you have Marcus Brown, who I don't have any idea what's going to happen, but I do know that he didn't practice at all this week. No real interest in guys like Boykin and Roberts and Willie Snead if you did want to pair Lamar Jackson with 2 pass catchers and run it back with Seattle. It's kind of ugly.
This is one of the, I was referring earlier in the show about, I think a lot of people naturally, and it's true, you see the importance of stacking and correlating your lineups. But these dual threat quarterbacks are changing that to an extent. Lamar Jackson is a standalone guy. If you can run for 150 yards, that can just do it by itself. And you don't need to force in some guys if you don't want to, and maybe just one guy like Andrews or something like that. But if I use Lamar, I'm not going to try to reach for multiple receivers. I think that's wildly unnecessary and too risky.
All right. Alex, when it comes to Baltimore, are you doing anything here?
I like Mark Andrews. I think that the most likely circumstances that Marquise Brown is out, as you mentioned, not practicing at all this week. Of course, we won't know when we make our lineups here, so that makes it tough. But that makes a nice bump to Mark Andrews if it's the case, and he's already a pretty good fantasy player. Same price point as Darren Waller, so you can kind of pivot off the ownership there.
Okay. Well, let's get to the last game, fellas. We're almost there. And by the way, I haven't mentioned it yet, but always save the best for last. Deeper Dive, all one word, is how you can get 50% off your first month of Awesemo Plus subscription. Just go to awesemo.com/join. And when you do that, you will see a beautiful new landing page where you can not only get a express pass for $3.95 a week, but also you can click start membership, and it'll take you to a page where you can basically get a feel for what type of membership you need. We ask you what type of player you are: serious, season-long player, advanced, hobbyist, professional player, casual player, and then we try to cater the package and the subscription around what you need, not give you too much, but also not leave you wanting. And Alex, I know that was kind of what you envisioned when you started Awesemo in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, really what I found is that, it's really tough to make money doing fantasy sports, but everyone loves to play so much, and a lot of people came up to me at these events. They're like, I want to play like you, but I just don't have time between work and my family. So that's why we provide all these great resources for you to use, so that you can kind of narrow down the scope of your research, and have really reliable information that you can use and not worry about how accurate it is. And this is the stuff I'm using to make my lineups every day. And if it wasn't good, I'd lose all my money. So.
Yep, absolutely. Use the sign-up code. Deeper Dive, all one word, get you 50% off your first month. That's ownership projections, player projections, the top stack tool, some great NBA content, and tools that we're going to be releasing are coming up with this season, which is right around the corner. PGA, NASCAR, soccer, baseball, basketball, hockey, football. We've got it all. Awesemo.com/join. Remember, use the sign-up code Deeper Dive, all one word, will get you 50% off your first month. We also have the Fantasy Cruncher add-on as well, which is very, very, very important if you're trying to be like Alex. Okay, Chicago and New Orleans. Ben, pretty ugly game, man. I mean, this game is heinous on a number of levels. Drew Brees remains out. You've got Trubisky, who is going to play, but I'm not sure if that's really much of an upgrade at all. Chicago's defense is what's kept them in games all season long. If you take out the game where they dropped 31 on Chicago, they're averaging like 13 points, or on Washington, they're averaging like 13 points per game this season. It's been really bad. Tariq Cohen has suffered as a result. Montgomery hasn't been efficient. Allen Robinson's really been the one guy where you can say, hey, he's having a pretty strong year. But overall, both sides are ugly. Kamara's out. Latavius Murray's interesting, but are they going to double? Are they going to double Michael Thomas and make it impossible to move the ball? It's a very good Chicago defense. What in the world are you doing here, Ben?
Not much. 37-point total. That's really low. Bears off a bye after getting embarrassed in London. It's a game that I like in the betting market. I think the Bears end the Saints run and really step forward. But from a fantasy perspective, I expect a really low methodical game, and the Saints kind of want to play like that now. I think people need to separate the name from what we're seeing. The last couple of weeks, they have been more than happy to lean on the defense, not let Teddy Bridgewater lose the game, let him be efficient, don't turn it over. And I can't imagine they deviate from that without Kamara. So I expect a low-scoring affair and one that I have almost no interest in from fantasy.
All right, simple enough. How about you, Alex?
I like Michael Thomas. I think that Kamara being out should open up a lot of passing volume to the rest of the team. Jared Cook is out as well, and he's being replaced by Josh Hill, a guy who doesn't get targeted very often when he's on the field. So what we're looking at, there are only really 3 pass catchers, Michael Thomas, Ted Ginn, and Latavius Murray, that get targeted at any sort of rate. And Michael Thomas, I mean, the opportunity will be there. What kind of defensive schemes they run in Chicago, I'm not as certain of, but I do know that Michael Thomas catches a lot of passes really at short distances, and those are a lot harder to cover and maybe not as high on the priority list for the Bears.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that would really be the only concern is do they double him and make life impossible for this team? What about Latavius Murray?
I think that he's a reasonable play. He isn't as cheap as I would expect, but on FanDuel and Yahoo, he's close to the minimum, so I think on those sites, he's a good play. On DraftKings, he's actually kind of expensive. On FantasyDraft, kind of in the middle. So a good play, but not a great one.
Yeah, Ben, I do want to ask you, Latavius Murray on Yahoo is $12. On FanDuel or on DraftKings, I don't think there's any way you would even try to get to him. But what about that $12 price point where $10 is the minimum salary?
Oh, absolutely. And that's someone, I'm much more price sensitive to a guy like that because he can get there on volume alone at
Correct.
that point. Yeah. He could have a bad game. He might not score, but you get 6 targets, you rack up some yards, and it doesn't kill you. Whereas you look at it on DraftKings, he needs a real effective game. And I just don't see that happening on the road in a spot where I think there's a lot of chance where the Bears just really shut down this offense completely.
I'm with you 100% on that one. Either of you guys, anything else from this game? I mean, it's not a pretty one.
Taylor Gabriel is back, but I don't know if I need to reach there. He does have some ability, and with Trubisky, they're going to be minuscule owned, but it seems like more risk than I'm willing to take on outside of, we talked earlier, you're in the $10 trying to win a milli top heavy. Maybe you want to go to a guy that low, but all in all, nothing outside of some flyers.
Yeah, Alex, close it out, man. Anything else here that jumps off the page at you or is worth considering? Allen Robinson's going to get shadow treatment from Lattimore, and I have a lot of respect for Marshawn Lattimore. I know he's had a couple rough games, but I still think he's one of the best corners in the game.
Yeah, I think Allen Robinson is a reasonable play. Probably the only guy on the Bears I'd consider going to. Montgomery is reasonable too, but Robinson's been having a pretty good season as far as getting targeted. He's efficient, and that could equal a big game.
Okay. Well, there it is, fellas. Ben, I need your hot take. Who do we got here? Is it Cincinnati finally getting their first win in Week 7?
I think that's going to be, yeah, I have a betting article on the site. Feel free to check that out for college and NFL. College has been fantastic. NFL, we'll see what we can do. But I'm going to go hot take that the Bengals find a way at home to get off the winless streak.
Okay. And Alex, final thoughts for Week 7 before we head out.
Oh, man, I got to give my hot take here first. Yep. My hot take is that Tyler Boyd will outscore T.Y. Hilton.
I like that.
That's a good
quite
one.
A bit. And go ahead.
Yeah, I think that the volume is going to be higher because Cincinnati throws the ball more. So that's kind of what I'm looking to in this game. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Thanks, FantasyDraft, for being the sponsor. I'm looking forward to the main event, saving all that money so I can put it down to order some Hooters wings. Let's go.
Hit that thumbs up if you enjoy the show, you want to see more, and you want to help support us at awesemo.com so we can continue to do free content like this each and every day on YouTube and on the site. It helps us out greatly, and we appreciate it. Of course, stick around. Coming up at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, you've got NFL Live Before Lock, also presented by FantasyDraft. Josh Engelman and Chris Spags going to take you up till that 1 p.m. lock. And then Manny Laura, myself, breaking down everything after the games, after the 4 p.m. games, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern, Sirius XM Fantasy, Sirius 210, XM 87. It's Awesome Fantasy Football Game Day. Definitely check it out and come along for the ride with us. And then at 7:30, NFL Live Before Lock with EMAC and Eric. That's going to take you up to Sunday Night Football, Philadelphia Eagles and Dallas Cowboys. That's what's on the schedule for today. Thanks for hanging out with us, and we'll see you back here next time on the NFL Deeper Dive.